Hello and welcome to Dungeoneered, a podcast dedicated to discussing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Josh.
Let's do this. Okay, so Josh, for Lukewarm Open today, I wanted to talk a little bit about everyone's favorite beloved show, Critical Role. And I know that it is a favorite show of yours as well. And last week's episode, did you watch last week's episode first?
I have watched so little of this season, I just stopped caring, and I was like, I'm just gonna not. I'm good.
Oh, no. Yeah, I was there for a little while.
So I haven't watched in
but I kind of came back.
What episode are they on?
Boy, that's a great question. I think it's like 30-something. I don't remember.
Oh, well, I stopped
30?
at like 13, probably. Oh, no, sorry. It's probably more like 6. So I'm quite a ways back.
I had a pretty big break with it also. I don't know why. Because I really like it. I love, like, Thursday nights watching Critical Role is like a tradition for me now. So I really enjoy it. But I kind of took a big break. But I've been back as of like 2 weeks. Because I had a long vacation, and I was able to kind of catch up and watch over that vacation while driving. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got to re-catch up. But last week, there's no spoilers for anybody who's nervous, but last week they did a very fun, I guess you could say, mini game within D&D. Like a very fun...
and you love your mini games. So
yes, a dice game within a dice game in D&D. And I love them. And I know we've talked a little bit about like stuff like this before in Lukewarm Opens, but today I kind of wanted to ask and talk about if you have made any kind of mini games within D&D and how you like to run them, if you like to run them at all, because I know some people don't like them at all.
I know I've talked about this before on the podcast. I had a kind of like Las Vegas loosely based city. So there's a lot of like gambling places, and it kind of had a crazy nightlife and stuff. So I went through and all the games that were written in D&D, like that you can have proficiency in and such. Like I was
like
okay,
Dragon Chess or whatever.
Yeah, like Dragon Chess and those things. And I was like, okay, these things are clearly games in the world. These would probably be at casinos. So first off, if they want to engage in them, I need to have rules for how we would do that. So I created one for all the in-game things you can be proficient in.
How did you go about doing that? Is it just like rolling dice? What's the catch there?
Well, so there's dice, and then there's modifiers. So like Dragon Chest gets your intelligence modifier added to it, but mine is you roll a d20, a d12, add those together, then you minus a d8 and a d4, and then you add your intelligence modifier.
So it's interesting, that you talk about it, because I don't know, I have a hard time with mini games in D&D. So I have a million of them, and you guys have played them in the campaign, and we've talked about them on the podcast before. I have a bunch of little fun mini games that have to involve circuses and circus games and gambling games and stuff like that, because I think they're really fun. But I have a really hard time balancing like luck with like proficiency in a game, or like stats in a game. So like Dragon Chess is a really good example. So it's like, do I just roll and add my intelligence modifier and I just win then? Or like if it's a card game and I'm proficient in cards, do I just roll and then add my proficiency for the card game? Or do I, have a different, because card games are pretty luck-based. So do I roll dice first, like see what cards you get, and then roll intelligence-based stuff?
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem I always have with mini games.
Mine, almost always, they're contested. So you're rolling against, most often, the DM as whatever NPC you're playing against. But like so it really depends on the quality of the other person and their roles to whether you'll be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I usually end up going with like you roll a couple d6s or whatever, and then you roll, like just to kind of have some chance of luck within the game. Mm-hmm. But the main thing I want to talk about, so in Critical Role, they did a really fun and interesting one, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it. They essentially did pod racing in D&D, and I really want to talk about how you run mini games in the sense of like a combat. So a combat that's not a combat, but is a combat. Do you know what I'm saying?
Do you know if these rules were made by Matt or if they were the ones that already exist in D&D?
Oh, that is a great question. I have no idea.
Because I'm have sure the book next to me because you didn't bring this up beforehand, so I couldn't prepare. But in
they actually have rules in it?
In the Tomb of Annihilation book, they have dinosaur races that you go through the town. And they have these whole rule system for doing these races. So if the pod racing, they just use those rules. That is very possible.
Oh, it might have been what it was. Because essentially what he did is he had everybody roll initiative, and he broke up the combat, in quotations, heavily in quotations, into like sections, where he had the beginning of the race with some interesting things that happened during the beginning part of the race, the middle part of the race where the main portion of the combat occurred, where like actual combat occurred, and then the final portion of the race. And in each little section, he had little obstacles that the players had to kind of avoid and get around during this race. And
did their steeds have different stats based on like, oh, this one's faster, this one's stronger, this one's... Yeah, that sounds a lot like sounds a lot like the Tomb of Annihilation system. And
it's got to be at least similar.
Yeah, at least inspired.
Yeah, here's the dinosaur racing rules. Yeah, but I don't think he got into a lot of different stats within the machines that he had, the vehicles that he had. But there were definitely some, because some had better AC, some had more health, some had, depending on what you were doing with them. But it was really interesting, and it made me think about. In my campaign, I have a lot of... Well, not a lot. I have a pretty big major game in my world that nobody in any of my games has ever played, and I've always wanted somebody to make like a character based around it, and it's called Sky Sail Racing.
Yep, you've talked about it a few times. It's in Raven something in the North.
Well, it's everywhere, but I actually stole it from Star Wars, from pod racing, because I really like pod racing. And even though it's like really corny in Star Wars, but I think it's a really fun and interesting idea. But I was just curious if you had anything like that, any races or anything like that you have done or did do in D&D.
I have found that my party defines those as irritating, those types of things. So every time I've created the opportunity... Every time I've created the opportunity and then created rules for it, they don't engage with it. So I'm like, well, if they don't care for it, then that's fine. So I am like, okay, well, then I'll just stop creating that type of encounter because they don't enjoy it. It's not something interesting to them. And I think it's partially because it doesn't feel like, if it's just like this thing you encounter in a city... Like, it doesn't feel like you're going... It doesn't feel like there's a purpose. It feels like you're wasting time. And I know as a player, I don't like that. Like, yeah, oh, cool, there's this little encounter, this little thing you could do. But it's like, if it's not helping me get to the next stage or solve the problem, I don't know if I really want to engage with it. Like, if it was like some sort of a contest where by winning the contest, we are gaining favor with somebody, or we're doing like it has some sort of value to it, then I think I would be more interested in it rather than it just existing so I should enjoy it.
Yeah, see, that's kind of where I wanted the conversation to go, because, again, I always have issues incorporating them in a way that just doesn't feel like, meaningless. And there is a time and place for those meaningless fun things. There absolutely is in D&D. As a player, I am very ADD as a player, and I go everywhere. I do everything, even if it doesn't make any sense for the story, right? If the DM drops something, I'm doing it. That's pretty much how I play D&D, just because I think it's fun. So there is a time and place for those things, but what I liked about Critical Role so much was not so much necessarily that it was just, a fun mini game, so to speak, but that it had pretty big story significance. And
did you want to talk about how to make that?
We definitely can, but it just mixed up combat in a way that didn't feel like it was just a traditional combat. So, and I think we've talked a little bit about it too, is that in Critical Role, I like to skip a lot of combats, just because, like, I don't know, I find the combat aspect of anything in D&D, even when I'm playing, to be the most boring part of D&D. I love combat aspect, but I just find the roleplay and the, story elements more interesting, so I end up skipping. But this one I didn't end up skipping because I really, really enjoyed it, because it was just a different take and a different twist on combat. And so I kind of wanted to talk too a little bit about how you incorporate a different twist on combat in a way, like connecting into a storyline, right? To make it so it doesn't feel like it's this meaningless mini game or this meaningless, side thing that you don't need to be doing.
I mean, if you're talking about combat in particular, the way I mix it up and make it feel like there's more to it than just a regular combat is making them be protecting somebody. So it's not just like, oh, run up and hit the person. It's, oh no, if we all run up, then we're leaving these people exposed behind us, and like we can't, like, we're trying to transport them. You're gonna give us money, or we're helping them for a purpose. So us not protecting them would be a problem.
Yeah, what about, like, using the rules of combat to do something that isn't combat? Does that make sense? I'm not sure how I want to ask this.
Well, I mean, like, I'll do turn-based things, them trying to escape something, and so I kind of turn it into turn-based. Like, oh, everything's crumbling around you. We're gonna literally have a battle mat, and you're gonna have to run your minis across this thing before any of you fall into the holes.
Yeah, well, and that reminds me, and we may have talked about this too. I know we've done so many episodes, but Matt Colville has, like, an interesting, fun thing that he loves to do, where he does, like, skill challenges, I think is what he calls them.
Skill challenges.
Where he has, like, events that take place, and the group has to figure out how to get over these skill challenges. And if you get X amount of fails compared to X amount of successes, you either fail or pass. And then
it's 3 and 3.
Combat happens or something. Yeah, something negative happens. And then I think he changes those based on the difficulty of, the events that occur. You know? So, like, if you get two...
I mean, some of them, they can also... It's also just an interesting way to make travel more interesting. Like, you just say, okay, you're going through this forest. How are you going to help your team get through this forest? And then they can only use... His ruling is you can use any ability, any skill that you are proficient in. You just have to describe how your proficiency in that is helping the party. So, like, you can even go weird with it. If you can explain your thinking on why you think that should help, then he's like, that's okay.
Well, and I think too that in and of itself counts as kind of like a mini game, so to speak. It's not a mini game, but, like, it's a thing within the game that you're using certain mechanics that aren't just, combat, or not just, like, role-playing, right? You're, like, trying to solve a problem, with a series of dice rolls that feel like a combat, that feel like, something that's part of the game. Yeah. But it's a total mix-up from what you're used to playing, and I love that kind of stuff.
I was just watching the new Vampire the Masquerade game that they're starting on the World of Darkness YouTube channel. This is the one with Abria Iyengar, called New York by Night, and it's fantastic. By the way, it's still Jason Carl, who's the one of the creators of 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, and an incredible I forget what they call it, if it's just GM or whatever the game runner is, but he's fantastic. And so there was a point where one of them was chasing a person that had a briefcase that they wanted, and so he just said, hey, you have 3 turns, and then this guy gets away. So, like, you have 3 turns to figure out how you're going to catch up or do anything. And so I like that. It was like, it gave them the end goal of, you have 3 turns, do what you will.
Yeah, and that's really fun because it's a total mix-up on, like, your standard combat, right? So instead of doing, like, a combat where you're shooting at him and trying to fight him or whatever while he gets away, you know, you have this amount of time to figure out using whatever skills or things you want to do to try and stop this guy from getting away, which I think is really, really fun and kind of a unique twist that I don't think happens enough during D&D, and I definitely need to be better about, you know, doing that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I really like the skill challenges thing a lot. I think the skill challenges things are really fun. It's just can be difficult to incorporate into a game for me when, you know, there's just there's so much other stuff that you can do, but I think, you know, especially those like escape scenarios, you got to escape a city, like, you know, a bunch of guards are chasing you, or, you know, the temple is collapsing type stuff. Those are really fun to do skill challenges and different, you know, things in.
Well, I think I'm going to cut off the lukewarm open here, and
let's do it.
Go into the topic. Now, this week our topic is inspired by something that just came out. And it's the trailer for the new Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves. Now, there's a lot of cool things that happen in this trailer, with lots of monsters rendered beautifully and interesting cast, but the thing that stuck out with me the most is something in particular that I was like, I want to know as much as possible about this thing. But before I get into it, Aaron, I had you watch the trailer before, just to make sure that you had some context. Could you speak on what you feel after watching the trailer?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I wanted to touch on about it, and I actually wanted your opinion a little bit about it too, because I know there's been somewhat of a mixed reaction among the D&D community about it.
I mean, the main mixed reaction is from jerks that are being rules lawyers.
Yes.
It's mostly good. It's mostly, hey, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see it.
No, exactly. Well, the first thing is that I'm excited. I think it's super cool. I love that D&D is getting a bigger spotlight. And the reason I even say that is, like, my brother. So me and my brother are really close. And he actually texted me about it. And he was like, oh my gosh, did you see this? This looks so awesome. And I was like, yeah, it is. I can't wait. So, you know, it just gets people into D&D who've never seen D&D before. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, it kind of makes me want to play D&D. I've never done it before. And I was like, yeah, you do. You know? So I think that's really, really cool. I just think any chance that you can get, you know, D&D into the spotlight to get more people in.
I also think
it's just such a fun game.
That it's gonna be better than, like, trying to make, like, a video game movie or a book movie, because the reason why those suck so much a lot of times is because they're trying to condense all this thing that was not made to be in a few hours format into a few hours.
Yep.
And with D&D, the whole point is you're always making your own story. And the time that game movies and stuff are successful is when they make their own story in the world.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect format for it. I mean, just look at, you know, again, to bring up Critical Role, just look at, you know, the animated series they did, and it fits perfectly. Even though they had to condense a lot, it still fits perfectly into the format of a show or a movie or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a perfect fit. The other thing that I really enjoyed about it, and it will get into my third point a little bit as well, but it felt very D&D to me. Like it felt like peak D&D. You know, one of the lines in the trailer talks about how, you know, we've caused this issue and we're going to fix it. But, well, you know, we'll figure it out. You know, we'll figure it out later. You know?
Yeah, we'll figure out how we do that later.
Yeah.
Maybe over drinks.
Peak D&D. Yeah, exactly. So that's another part I really loved about it, was that it really felt like a D&D party. You know, these 4 rando people getting together, and they've caused a horrible disaster of some kind from doing, you know, stealing a magical item or doing something like that. And now they got to fix it. And, you know, we're just gonna wing it as we go, because if that's not D&D, I don't know what is, to be honest.
Well,
but it brings me to my third and final point really quick too, is that it seems, and I don't know if this is a really good thing or a really bad thing, or totally neutral, but it seems very stereotypical D&D as well. So like the bard seems like a very stereotypical bard. The barbarian seems like a very stereotypical barbarian. Just from the trailer that I watched, seems very, very stereotypical.
But she doesn't seem stupid.
And I kind of like it. No, but I kind of like it.
I like that she's not.
Yeah,
they're not playing up the dumb barbarian archetype.
No, but it's still kind of that, like, mean, strong barbarian lady, and like, I don't know, I kind of like the stereotype though. I kind of enjoy it, and I think it's fun. I still think it's fun. So I don't know. Those are my kind of 3 basic thoughts that I had about it. Well, besides that, the villains and magic items look really cool and are really well designed and rendered.
And this is the thing that I wanted to, that stood out to me, and I know, Aaron, because we've talked about something similar. I know because we've talked about something similar on the podcast before, that you will enjoy this as much as I did. There was a scene with a beautiful dragon that was blowing. It's a red dragon, adult red dragon. It was blowing this fire across this like bridge or something as the party's running across. And this dragon was quite chunky, you could say.
Yes.
And we talked about and loved the chunky dragon that was in Fizzbands when we talked about that. So we already have set up our love for chunky dragons on Dungeoneered.
Yep. Oh, heck yeah.
And I began to research upon seeing this beauty. I was like, I need to know everything about this dude.
Oh, no.
And the D&D community seems to have fallen in love with him as well. And also we're talking about, okay, who is this? Who do we think this is? Is this someone from the lore? Is this not? And the general consensus that we have at this moment is that this is most likely the adult red dragon from the campaign setting Out of the Abyss, named Themberchaud, or the Wormsmith of Gracklstug.
Ah, yes.
Now, before we go into details on the dragon, we're going to talk about Gracklstug. It was also known as the City of Blades, and this city was an Underdark city ruled by Duragar. I'm going to read the description from the city from the Forgotten Realms wiki. Gracklstug was a cavern city and subterranean port. It had smelters and foundries mingling among stalagmites. The air smelled acrid and was filled with the industrial sounds, fire, steam, and iron ringing. The city was lit by firelight. This city, if you can't tell from the name and from the description, is known for its incredible craftsmanship, especially in terms of their weapons. This was aided by our friend, Themberchaud. Themberchaud...
I love his name so much.
It literally is spelled... It's like one letter off from being spelled the Ember Chad.
I know, it just kills me and I love it. It kills me so much.
Themberchaud would keep the fire of the forges burning at incredible heats and perfectly tuned for the craftsmen, for the simple payment of treasure, food, and slaves, which were a mixture of both of the previous 2 options. Now, dragons are fickle creatures and greedy, and the Duragar knew it, so they worked very hard to kind of gain the ally Themberchaud and keep him kind of docile to an extent, as much as you can with a dragon.
Gotta make him chonky. That's what you gotta do.
Originally, the gifts were enough to get Themberchaud on their side, but they knew that this wouldn't last. A dragon's greed would make it incredibly difficult to keep them happy for long periods of time. So, for a while, they gave incredibly large amounts of food, more than gold or treasure. In doing this, they began to see the effects of their actions as Themberchaud grew larger and larger and more lethargic, becoming the chunky boy that we see him as today.
Yes.
Despite his body growing slow, and his mind did not slow. His mind continued to greed and lust for more things. Themberchaud grew unhappy in the service of these Duergar, wanting more and more. He even wanted to take over the city and have them all subservient to him. Now, Themberchaud was not...
as a dragon would.
Yes, as most dragons would. Themberchaud was not stupid. He knew what the Duergar were doing, or at least he thought he did. He had most of it pretty much understood. Now, before we get into what the Duergar were actually doing, I kind of have to provide a little bit of backstory. One of the things that Themberchaud was either given as a treasure, or maybe it was his own. It's unclear as how he got this, but he had and treasured a red dragon egg. It's unclear if he just found it or if it was biologically his, but he had it. And it became a major prized possession of his that he just loved in his hoard, and he treated with as much respect as you would for a child. In the end, it was stolen by thieves. Specifically a thieves guild. And Themberchaud was furious. But what he didn't know...
Don't get the chonky boy mad.
But what he didn't know was that it being stolen actually saved his life. It was a good thing for Themberchaud, because the Duergar were planning to use the egg to replace Themberchaud. Because Themberchaud was not actually the first time they had done this. What they do is they take a red dragon, create this deal with them, keep them happy and fat for as long as possible. Then once he gets a little unruly, they kill them and replace him with a younger red dragon. And so now the group that was keeping him in place didn't have that red dragon replacement. So they needed to either find the egg or find some replacement. In the time that after that it was stolen, the keepers, the people that kind of kept Themberchaud, began to...
You know what this kind of reminds me of, to interrupt you? Have you ever heard the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
I don't see how this relates.
I don't either. I just had to. Anyways, continue.
You're bringing up Star Wars a lot this episode.
I am. I like Star Wars.
Well, so that's something I did want to bring up, but I guess I'll bring it up in the middle of the episode very weirdly. I kind of want the next 2 or 3 episodes.
Chad was gonna die.
I want the next 2 or 3 episodes to be on Star Wars. But the problem is the topics I want to talk about require such previous knowledge that I want to go through each one. Because I've been playing KOTOR, and I have been just
have you?
diving into Star Wars lore, specifically the ones around the KOTOR games. And it's so freaking good.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I've been in a weird place of YouTube the last, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks now I watched a Star Wars short, and now I'm getting a million Star Wars lore videos. So now I'm totally invested in Star Wars lore.
Okay, we have to talk about this after the podcast. I have so much to talk to you about, my friend. So much. Okay. Oh man.
Anyways, continue on the Themberchaud.
So these keepers of Themberchaud were keeping him always had protection to kind of watch Themberchaud, but also to say, hey, no, these guys are here to protect you. Once the egg was stolen, they needed to send more of their people out to find this thieves guild, to find where this stolen egg went. They had to pull off a bunch of the people that were watching Themberchaud. So Themberchaud was a little bit more free to do as he pleased for a while. In doing so, they began to hire people to kind of fill in this position. And in the case of the campaign setting, or the campaign Out of the Abyss, the people that would be hired for this position would be the players. And what Themberchaud would do is that he would try and convince the players, hey, can you help me take over this Duergar city? And so there's no lore written about what actually happened, because it's part of a campaign. So they can't really say whether he was successful or he failed. but that is where the lore leaves him, having tried to talk to these mercenaries that were hired to, quotation marks, defend him into turning on their masters.
Ooh, interesting.
Yes. And I think he's just a great, interesting, chonky boy. And so I thought, well, we could talk about this week, which is something I don't think we've talked about in any of our settings, but I think is very important for a setting, is especially for a setting in Dungeons and Dragons, is what's the origin of dragons in our world?
Oh,
like, how do they come to be in this world? Are they descendants of a god? Are they beasts that just kind of become this sentient magical monstrosity? Like, how does dragons happen in our world?
Yeah, and that's it's a pretty big part of Dungeons and Dragons.
It very much is.
So
it's almost like it's in the name
to understand. Well, I think I want to do something a little bit different this week. Then I think I want us both to explain our current worlds, how dragons came about, if you have that in your world, because I think that'd be interesting first, and then we'll decide how we want it in this world. Does that sound cool?
Okay, so you say we talk about how it is in our world first?
Yeah, because it's kind of the first time we've ever, gone into it, so it might be fun just to kind of take a look at some examples.
I don't know your world's origin of dragons, and I kind of would like to know.
Yeah, it'd be kind of important. Yeah.
As a dragonborn worshiper of a dragon god in your world, I would like to know more.
Yeah. No, I want you to go first though, because I don't know how long mine's going to be, and I want to be able to cut it short if I have to.
See, I want to gather my thoughts. That's why I want you to go first.
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yes.
I mean, I can easily go first. When I originally sat down to create dragons in my world and like kind of their origin, I was kind of looking a little bit at stat blocks and how dragons seem to be virtually the same strength as many, really high level entities. So even like some deities, some dragons are, even stronger than some deities. So I kind of had to start from a place where, due to the like limitation factors that D&D gives you, kind of like, well, these dragons can grow up to be very powerful and very strong. And, if left unchecked, they can be some of the most powerful entities in the universe. So, my world is broken up into creation eras. These like long periods of time that the gods created entities and creatures. During these creation periods, they ended up creating dragons. And dragons ended up becoming too powerful for the gods to control.
Like over 9,000 powerful?
What?
Like over 9,000 powerful?
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening is one of the dragons ended up rising up and rebelling against the gods, because the dragons essentially thought that the world deserved to be free. So in my world, when the gods created races, they created them as their armies, their individual machines of war in order to take over the material plane. So each god has their own plane that they control and command, and during that time, they created their whole armies in their planes to then connect to the material planes and invade, because they wanted to be able to control all the vast amount of resources in space that the material plane provided. So it turned into this giant war between the gods and the demon lords, which are the evil set of gods. Anyways, huge battle occurred. Huge war occurred, and the dragons began to realize that we're powerful entities. We're not even sure if we were created by gods or not, or if we were created by our own deity. So they kind of began to question their creation story, which is still somewhat unknown today. So dragons began to question the authority that gods and demon lords had over them. Then they began to question, well, shouldn't we all have this kind of freedom? Shouldn't every individual have the kind of freedom that dragons want and desire. So they created their own races of dragonborn and things like that, and rallied underneath the god of the dragons, who is a dragon himself. And they rebelled and fought against the gods of light. And the gods of light were the ones who had victory over the demon lords in the first war. The dragons, led under this dragon god named Karath, defeated the gods of light, sealed them away forever, with the sacrifice of their dragon god being sealed away forever as well. So the dragon god sealed himself away to give everyone freedom on the material plane. Thus creating dragons, kind of creating the free version of dragons that we know. So there's a couple instances in my lore that dragons are created. First, dragons are created underneath the gods, by the gods. However, dragons don't necessarily believe that, and it's not necessarily a fact within society, within the world. So the belief under the Church of Light is that gods created dragons. The belief in like dragonborn society, for example, especially dragonborn societies that are heavily in touch with their, dragon ancestry, is that dragons created themselves. So they had their own god, one of their own gods who was outside of the pantheon. Created
That's
all
Korath.
dragonborn. What?
And that's Korath, you said, right?
Yes, and that's Korath. And then Korath freed all of humanity and civilization by defeating the gods of light with all of his ancient dragons and sealing himself away as a way of preventing the gods of light from ever controlling humanity again. So that's their kind of version. However, there's a big split in D&D between dragons, right? You have multiple different types of dragons, and I've added more types of dragons in my world as well. And that split happened after Korath sealed himself away. The dragons decided, well, who is going to rule over dragonkind, right? Who's going to rule over dragonkin? And that kind of broke the difference between chromatic and the other ones, my mind is blanking. Chromatic and
metallic
dragons. So they ended up splitting and having this massive, I wouldn't say war, more of a disagreement between who should rule over who. Metallic went the way of, more friendly towards humanity, more accepting towards humanity, whereas chromatic went more towards domination over humanity, and that maybe humanity is lesser than us and they shouldn't actually be free. So they kind of split into two different groups. Then the third group, which is more along the lines of serpents. So Yuan-Ti is their race creation, and lizard folk are their race creation. These like serpent figures. They broke away as well from dragonkind, and they have their own dragonkind. So those are sea dragons, which you guys have found in the campaign as well. Sea serpents that kind of roam the deep. Those are their own dragon kind. So there's even dragons in my world that do not fly, and they just slither across the ground like a giant snake. Those dragons broke away because they did not like the discrimination they received from most dragons about their abilities to fly, to, all of these different things. So they also broke away from that and created their own individual kind. And that's kind of where we are today, is these three groups that believe three complete different things. So, that's kind of the basic, really fast rundown of dragon origins in my world, specifically starting from creation from gods, but dragons don't believe that is the case, and they believe their own god created them. So,
yeah. Well,
how about you?
So I'm currently in a post-apocalypse setting.
Yep.
And the origin of dragons in that is nobody knows. Very few still remained, like 3 that the party sort of knows, but hasn't, like, they only met 1.
Yeah.
And, like, that one had gone mad over the just centuries of loneliness, that it was not something they could talk to. And so they have not been able to know any sort of origin of dragons. Not a great answer, I know, but that is what it is for this current setting. Now, I'm in the middle of creating 2 new settings, and I got to figure out those origins.
Yeah, no, and it's I don't know, for me, even though D&D is so focused on dragons in a lot of ways, it's really difficult to create dragon origins because they're so powerful and so like unique and intelligent that it's like, do I really just want them to be created by a god? So in my world, like I said, it is partially an unknown answer, but it just depends on who you ask. So if you ask the Church of Light, well, the gods of light obviously created dragons. If you ask the Dragonkin, well, obviously we created ourselves, like, right? We had our own dragon entity. There are even sects within the neutral gods. So there's multiple different pantheons in my world. The neutral gods, the demon lords, and the gods of light. Those are the 3 main pantheons. Those are the ones that are known about and the ones that are accepted. Followed by the Ancient One, or Korath, who is number 4. So he's his own pantheon because the Dragonborn essentially exclusively worship him. So the neutral gods have their own theory that dragons existed along with the world. So they were essentially like primordials, and they were a forming force of the material plane and have existed this whole time. So there's multiple different theories on how dragons were created. It just depends on who you ask. So.
Mm-hmm. So in our season 5 world, how do you see dragon creation going?
Okay, well, this is a difficult question.
Yes,
because we have it such focused on, gods and this like, bouts of skill that it's very interesting to throw dragons in there. And I have a few ideas that could be fun. One, dragons were created by the gods as the ultimate skill test, to test one's abilities and to put on the best show, if that makes sense. So like a god versus a dragon is a difficult task and a fun task to watch. So that was my first thought. But I don't know if I'm satisfied by that.
That makes sense.
So then my brain goes to, I kind of keep that idea, but it's more of an excuse for gods. So dragons have existed with the gods since the beginning of time, and the gods really can't do anything about them because they're pretty powerful. So they've just kind of turned it into an excuse to promote their games. Right? So
yeah,
where it's like dragons have always existed and have always been a thorn in our side and have always, had their own.
I always like the
rulership.
Idea of accidental creations, like the most powerful creations being accidents that were not intended because they never wanted something that could actually challenge them. So like I like the mythical stories of creations from the blood of gods that was spilled, like came these creations. Or I don't know how else, if dragons were an accident, how do you see them any other ways besides the spilled blood of gods?
I like that. If I were to do an accident, man, I don't really know how I would want to do that besides the spilled blood of gods, like, something, horrific happening, because it seems pretty hard to me for a god to like accidentally, screw up on, some sort of, creation of entity that powerful, unless, there was something that a horrific happened to them, like a, battle, or, everybody died or something like that. So
what if it was something like they were created by an evil god as they were leaving as they were like trying to create an enemy of the pantheon? Or what if it was like a blessing to the highest ranking followers of theirs, and then all of them ended up going astray, so they're like, well, never giving that again.
Well, there was a thought that I had too, that we like just incorporate them into the pantheon.
Yeah, or they're gods as well.
Where we make dragons that are gods and dragons that compete in the arenas and stuff. which could be fun as well. I think that could be a really fun idea. Like maybe there was a god of dragons who, a god who didn't feel as if they had equal representation, so they created more dragons, more kin like them. That could be something we go with, which could be pretty easily explained. But then it brings up the question: do I want dragons to be part of this? I kind of want dragons to be part of it in a way that's like negative, like they are seen as part of the game and not as the participant. Does that make sense? Like a tiger in a gladiatorial arena, right? Where they are the pieces to use within an arena, not participating themselves to gain followers within an arena. Because I like the idea of the pantheon. I like the idea of the pantheon treating them like animals, even though they're not animals. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So then it makes me think, well, what if we had we started the world by the gods, fought over it, right? And created, different things through their battles and through their creation expression. But what if the world was ruled over by something else before they got here? Like if we did dragons and dragonkind, and they dominated over dragonkind and beat up dragonkind, and then formed the world how they wanted, restarted, destroyed the whole world to a blank slate so that they could make their own creation. So originally this world was inhabited by dragon and dragonkind and primordials and stuff like that. The forces of this, world. Like dragons are the ultimate incarnation of, the elements, like fire and lightning and, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so they were with the primordials or something in the beginning of the world, and then the gods came and destroyed it into a blank slate so that they could create the world of their dreams. But I don't know if I like that either. Thoughts? Do you like the accidental creation route, like dragons being accidentally created by the gods through
I think it's interesting. Event? I also I've normally try to have at least one god, at least one of the deities in my world as a dragon. Like a dragon just lived for so long and became so powerful it got granted the power of a god. So those are both really fun things to play with. My brain actually started going towards elementals for some reason. And so
we could do something like my world where one of the dragons gained favor among all dragonkind and became a god and now participates in the events. Because that's essentially what happened in my world, is one dragon rallied everyone together and gained all their support and became incredibly powerful. Yeah. So, we could do something like that, and then we have this dragon who, maybe at the beginning of his gladiatorial arena, he'd fly down, then he would turn into his polymorph form and land with his sword or whatever. Yeah. You could do something like that.
Now, could I go somewhere weird with you?
Yeah.
Feel free to say no. This is just where my mind is going. What if the gods of different, that had domains they'd taken of different elements created elementals of a bunch of different variants and such? Okay. Eventually, these elementals were sentient beings, and some of them began to not like their gods very much. So they wanted to escape, leave their god, and just kind of live their life away from the showmanship of these games and such. They tried to hide in the creatures of the world, like little lizards and geckos and things like that. But when they hid inside them, they kind of mutated the creatures and they became these giant beings of elemental energy. And eventually the gods put a stop to it, whoa, you can't, this is not okay. So maybe elementals are pretty much unheard of nowadays, but before, elementals used to be a major part of any god's retinue. And so some became all reptile, modern reptile kind would have grown from this. So the lightning beheers would have been a lightning element, an energy elemental. that went into some sort of gecko or something.
Okay. I think that's a very interesting start. I think that's a very interesting idea of, these elementals didn't enjoy the, frivolous nature of the gods.
Yeah.
And so they ended up hiding from them. Because I think that's really fun. That's essentially how my world starts as well. With neutral gods, they didn't like the behavior of the gods of light or demon lords, and they fled to the material plane, and that's where they hid. And so I think I love that concept. What if we kind of like combined a lot of these ideas and like the world that the gods came to, where we kind of start with that base thing of it was like ruled by these elementals and primordials, right? Like the base elements of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, fire, water, earth, lightning, all that kind of stuff. And the gods, when they took over the world, they gave them a section of the world that is now theirs that they can live in. But the rest is the gods' world, and they created the rest of it. So maybe we have like not an undiscovered continent, but a forbidden continent where it is, a wild, untamed place. And maybe that's partly where we, a lot of the gods get their monsters and things for this tournament.
Yeah.
It's like a wild and untamed place controlled by the primordials and elementals. And I love the idea of how elementals originally fled and claimed that place as they, inhabited creatures that they turned into dragons, or turned
what
into
what if they
elemental...
just claimed the area and lived on there, and just the living in proximity to these creatures, it slowly mutated the smaller reptilian beings on that island or continent or whatever into the large beasts we know as dragons today.
I mean, I love that. I think that's a really very
so instead of them going inside, it was a proximity and exposure to the raw energy and raw elemental magics of elementals.
Yeah, and maybe we have it where there's like a treaty, like how the gods made a treaty with themselves about these games. They also made one with these, elementals and primordials, saying, if you just agree to stay in this section of the world, we won't, subjugate you to our rule in terms of like these games, and you guys can live on your own. But in return, you provide us with these interesting monsters for gladiatorial arenas and show.
Mm-hmm.
That could be something that's interesting too, later down the road if the gods did something like that instead of wiping them out.
Yeah. I like the idea of finding these creatures and trying to use them to make the games more interesting.
Yeah. Because I think if I'm thinking about the world, like, I just think that's probably what the gods would do if they're so into, this frivolous, this flaunting of, their abilities and gaining followers. They'd probably take advantage of the natural elements of this world and the natural, beings of this world to, enhance the game experience,
Yep.
to give it a little spice, so to speak. And so it'd be interesting if they had like an area set aside that they did not tamper with, so that they could exist and live in relative peace until the gods want something from them, to spice up their games. It could be very interesting. And it could also add a whole lot of political drama, if people found out, if like the party found out of like something weird like that was happening, so, and maybe even like air genocides and stuff like that came from there as well. You could do something like that too.
Is the island, where they went, still around? Is it hidden? Is it known about? What's the current condition of it?
I mean, I think it would probably be like a forbidden and hidden land that, like, it's its own continent type thing where nobody really steps foot because it's just not even, and maybe there's even stories of like beyond the shores is where, the the reach at the gods ends or whatever, But we don't go there because if you go past the seas, it's certain death, like those kind of weird little folk tales could be a thing that occurred. Or people just don't think about it anymore because they just don't think about it at all because this is the only place they've ever known. This is the only thing that's ever been, the only thing that's ever been, the land that they're on, the one that God's created. Or, we could just do a very standard, there was a dragon god and he created dragons, and he participates in these games. We can, maybe, if we went that route too, you could do maybe the dragon god created the dragons for the purposes of the games as well as part of his participation in the games. So maybe he has his own unique contract where these dragons are, so powerful and strong that they're one of those final, once in a lifetime battles that are, very risky.
Yeah.
And he gets certain amount of followers for producing dragons or whatever, right? So like maybe his art of expression and his way of gaining followers is creating these, these dragons as part of the games, and he gains followers because people start rooting on the dragons. So you could do something like that too. Oh, I love the green dragon. He's so cool. He survived a round. He survived a combat. And then the god gains power. So his whole goal is to make his dragons live past adulthood into ancient dragon status so that he can gain more power.
So, the finalized story of dragons in our world, is it the dragon god? Is it the elementals on the plane? Is it proximity? Is it going into to escape? What is the finalized?
What do you think? What do you want?
I kind of like the island thing where they escape to that other continent or island, and then the creatures around them kind of get changed by the proximity of this like raw magic.
Yeah, I'm totally down with that. I think that's a really fun idea. I think
that some of those creatures eventually do come back and join in on the
games.
On the games, yes. And I think dragons become a major, like I think it starts out as an unsure thing, and then I think the kind of way that dragons get like their kind of modern stereotypes of modern dragons being greedy and all these things are by the ones that humanity sees the most are the ones who are involved in the games, who are greedy and all these things, and like the dragons who are the opposite are the ones who didn't go back. So like all humanity sees is the ones that are involved in the games.
Yeah, and that's why they came back, because they were greedy and they wanted more power.
Yes.
And that's the best way to get more power is to be involved in the games.
Yes. Well, so do you think they get power in the same way that gods do?
I don't see why not.
I kind of want it to be I kind of want it to be a reserved thing. I kind of want it to be, like maybe one or two have been blessed with whatever the ceremony is that the gods need to do to allow you to gain power that way. But like the majority of them do not gain any power that way.
I mean that's what I'm thinking. So I think I picture them just as like basic normal combatants, right? Where like, any saint can rise up the ranks and eventually become, incredibly powerful if, they do such a thing, and then maybe even enter godhood or whatever, and not enter godhood, but, enter the ranks of followers and stuff to gain power.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably the similar thing, but with dragons. And I only think it's even more so specially reserved for only like the smartest dragons who have kind of outsmarted humanity and have gotten themselves into the arena, because I still think a lot of them are going to be used as, toys of the arena, so to speak.
Yeah.
And maybe like wyverns are like the,
even lower
what the
down.
Dragons should have been. Yeah, or like should have been, and but the dragons managed to, outsmart some of the gods in some ways. Or like, even lower down, right? So, are just complete monsters that have been captured and taken over.
Yeah, like most wyverns in D&D are supposed to be beastly. They're not intelligent or sentient. They're just beasts of different type. They look draconic in nature, but they are not. Now, these dragons that compete, are they competing as like mercenaries? Do they have to compete under a god? Are they like, because I mean the games are all for the god's growth. So do they make the requirement be that you have to be doing this under the banner of a god to be competing?
Okay, here's my idea. And let me know if you don't like this, because I'm very unsure about it. What if we had a dragon who is a god that disguises himself not as a dragon? Like, he's fooled. He participates in these arenas as like a polymorphed form.
What if it's the other way around?
What do you mean?
A god that, for the games, true polymorphs into a dragon.
Into a dragon.
And so it started as like, I can get these dragons on my side. And now he just like the majority of the time keeps his dragon form on.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And people who like the dragons in the gladiatory arena all love him and think he's the coolest, so he gains, followers from that.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah, I like that. I think that would definitely be a thing.
Well,
but I think there needs to be a dragon who, at the very least, is approaching that godhood mark within the arena, who's like faking being a human. Because I think that'd be a very interesting and fun thing. Because dragons are really smart.
Yeah, they are.
Like, dragons are really capable and really, really strong at, So it could be a fun little, maybe his ultimate goal, maybe it's like a side little mission where his ultimate goal is to like end the arena and become the ruler of the arena or whatever. Because he's like a red dragon or whatever.
Yeah.
Because his goal is to dominate over everything, but he can't become his true form because he'll, can be interesting and fun.
Well, I think I'm going to cut us off there. That will do it for episode 93 of Dungeoneered.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you all for listening. And if you listen to us on any podcasting apps that have ratings and reviews, it really helps the show if you write a review by showing you're engaging in more ways than just one. It also kind of helps it shows the podcasting app that they should promote our show a little bit because people like it.
Woo!
And if you would like to write to us, you can write to us at dungeoneered@hotmail.com. We'd love to hear from you if you have ideas for topics, lukewarm opens, or anything in between. Anything else you can think of, Aaron?
No, I don't think so.
Well, as I always say, always remember to be the sharpest barrel in the bunch. See you next time.
Bye!